It's 5 to 7. He looked to the heavens when he heard the engines hum. A sky full of planes and each one with a bomb. And they're gonna wanna drop them on.
Well, welcome to Islands at War with myself, Keith Pengelly, and
Nick Lahire. Hi, Keith.
Hi, Nick. And so, Nick, we are looking at, again, at January 1943. So this is part two. This is a sort of overrun. We had so much material for January 1943. So this is a secondary follow-up program in addition. So you can, of course, hear the January 43 episode 1 on Mixcloud or wherever you pick up your podcast from. Anyway, so Nick, the big issue that seemed to be confronting people was a rerun of sorts of the deportations that took place in autumn 1942. Rumours started to circulate amongst the population, and certainly amongst our diarists and such, that there was going to be another round of deportations.
So, you might, for those of you who didn't hear the September 42 episode, there were deportations in September 42, which was just before Operation Basalt, which we've covered in the October 42 episode, which was the raid on Sark, the famous / infamous raid on Sark, which happened at the beginning of October 42. So the first round of deportations wasn't connected with that. That was all connected with Germans being interned in Persia, what is now Iran. They had a large German expat population there that were working there, partly because it was a massive trading partner with Germany. So that's a quick recap of the stuff that happened. Now, Keith and I were just talking about this because Keith was wondering quite what went on, because the original quota was going to be 8,000 people that were going to be deported.
Across the whole of the Channel Islands.
Across the whole of the Channel Islands. That was what Hitler had ordered. It was 10 for 1. So there'd been 800 Germans and he wanted 8,000. Nowhere near that number went in September 42.
And why was that? Is it because they simply just wanted to get some people away at that time of year? There was, whatever the exact amount was, it fell short of 8,000 people. First of all, did we have 8,000 people that fell? No, that's exactly. So we didn't have 8,000 people that fell into that criteria, but then the amount that went in September 42 just happened to be the amount that they could get together in a short space of time.
Yeah, and there was a lack of will by those in command in the Channel Islands. They really were not keen on this whole thing. I mean, they'd ignored the previous order.
That's right.
Because there'd been an order almost, a year before that this was to be done, and they'd quietly brushed it under the carpet and I think they made the right noises at the start, and then it was just ignored. And then this whole thing with the Germans in Persia being interned reminded Hitler that he was like, I'm sure I've got some British people somewhere. Oh, hang on a minute. And then he was absolutely furious when he found out that they hadn't actually been shipped off to Germany already, because he'd given the order previously.
So do you think, Nick, had the episode in Iran been handled differently or not happened at all, there would have been no deportations from the Channel Islands? Or do you think at some point it would have cropped up again before D-Day?
It's one of those what ifs.
Yeah.
I mean, the second round was as a result of Operation Basalt. It just took them a while to get themselves organised. And because obviously Basalt was at the start of October 42, and we're in January 1943 when these rumours start kicking about, partly because the Germans spent an inordinate amount of time investigating Basalt, because they were convinced that there must have been Channel Islanders that were helping with this raid, and in whatever fashion. Now, poor Mrs. Pittard, if you listened to our October 1942 episode about Basalt, Mrs. Pittard, who was described as an old lady but was actually about 40.
I've got children at age.
Exactly. But, I suppose it's all relative if you're a commando in your 20s.
Yeah. Oh, yes, of course.
Or I think one of them might have even been late teens. You're probably do think that's quite an old person back in the 90s. I don't know if it's just me, but when you look at some of the photographs, people back in the 40s do look a lot older. I don't know if it's just the style of dress and things like that. They do tend to look a little bit older than perhaps there's somebody of the equivalent age now.
Haircuts as well.
I don't know. I mean, it's modern medicine and stuff like that, I guess. But anyway, poor Mrs. Pittard, who'd been woken up by the commandos at her house in Sark, had given them some help, but no more than just pointing out where the Germans were and filling them in on a few things that had been going on. Mrs. Pittard was being pulled backwards and forwards. She spent quite a bit of time in Guernsey, as did various other people from Sark who got pulled over here, questioned and sent back and whatever. But Mrs. Pittard was here for quite a while getting questioned. So they were busy investigating. So I think that's perhaps why these didn't happen until a little bit later on, that these rumours started as to what was going to happen. And the rumours, as with all these rumours, are very, very disparate and
wild.
In some cases. I mean, if we take potentially the most measured approach to this, Ruth Ozanne, who on the 2nd of January recorded in her diary that they'd had, quite a peaceful New Year, notes that, it was a bit of a shame that the curfew hours weren't adjusted in Guernsey over the holiday period, and it was a bit of a nuisance, especially as the curfew was only 9 o'clock. And then she notes all sorts of rumours have started getting about since the holidays. Now, this is only the 2nd of January. These rumours probably started on New Year's Eve when you've got lots of people
people were together,
close proximity to each other, and a few drinks and perhaps wondering what's going on. So this rumour was going about that the bailiff was going to drop a bombshell on the island. Ruth says every conceivable thing has been suggested as to what the particular bomb was going to be. All men of military age are to be taken to Germany. All unattached women are to go. That's an interesting one. The whole island is to be evacuated to Jersey.
So they would have completely, in people's minds, this rumour was that all Guernsey residents were going to be transshipped over to Jersey.
To Jersey,
So
yeah.
it has no sort of basis in any logic, really.
So Mr. Sherwell, so that's Ambrose Sherwell, who had, before his fall from grace with the Germans, been in charge of the controlling committee, well, certainly the Attorney General anyway, so nominally in charge because, as we know, the bailiff was quite elderly and not really in a position to, although he was the sort of titular head, was not actually in a position to be running things. Sherwell, who is back in the island following his short term of imprisonment in France, says that there's not a word of truth in it and that she shouldn't believe any of these stories. And Sherwell says, I think it's the Germans putting these rumours about. It's not.
Yeah, just to unsettle the population.
Ord also, though, has, he's heard some of the same rumours. He's heard that men of military age, the classes vary considerably, are at least to be interned in France. And then he's also heard that the remainder of the English-born are to be taken away, which we've just touched on. And then one that would be a real shocker, particularly for those that had lost relatives during the First World War, when the Royal Guernsey Light Infantry had some quite severe losses, 1917, during the First World War. And that was that the bailiff was to announce the loss of 500 Guernseymen in Tunisia. Now, that's quite a specific rumour. I doubt there were 500 Guernseymen in Tunisia
well, certainly not 500.
To have been lost, given that we're talking about approximately 10,000 Channel Islanders served in all armed services in all of the theatres of war, and 500 of them there would have been a little bit odd. Who knows where that one came from? Ord says, well, I've ruled out the first two of these because they're not true, which is quite interesting because then he's then perhaps placing some credence on the fact that 500 Guernseymen have been killed in Tunisia.
Yeah, I mean, we just don't know what was going through his head. But, rumours are rumours. But then, of course, the Germans did start producing lists of people that of our government, of the controlling committee. The Germans did start asking for various lists. I think the first one was they wanted a list of criminals.
Yeah.
And I think Louis Guillemette, the diarist who was the liaison between our controlling committee, which was our government, and the German field commandantur, here, he's asked for a list of persons punished in Guernsey for criminal offences during the previous 10 years. So, Nick, they're trying to sort of, scoop up anybody that may have been guilty of something and appeared in a magistrate's court, and so therefore deemed to have been a criminal. So they want a list of these people. Do we know if that actually took place? Was a list actually furnished?
Yeah, they came up with all sorts of lists of things. And the difficulty being, if you didn't give them the list anyway, they were just going to come up with a list of their own. So better to give them a list which you can perhaps not include everybody on.
Yeah.
Lesotho talks about this as well. If you listen to earlier episodes, Lesotho, our diarist in Jersey, he regularly talks about punishments and people getting locked up and things like that. And the fact that if you got a black mark against your name, as far as the Germans were concerned, you were on their radar for the rest of the occupation. Even if they couldn't catch you for something, you might come a cropper because they might not catch you actually doing something, but just because your name is known to them, then they might exact their revenge on you or something like that. He again talks about indefinite rumours have been rife regarding a further deportation. And again, talks about undesirables in a military age, more English-born Masons, and daftness of all daftness, nonconformists. I'm not quite sure what he means by that. Is that just basically people who don't conform to what the Germans think is normal?
No, I think nonconformist is a sort of religious offshoot, I think, either of Methodism or Church of England.
And of course, we know they had it in for the Freemasons, just because they really didn't like the Freemasons, or in fact anybody that any of those sort of societies like the Oddfellows and things like that. And he talks about what happened in Jersey and what happened here, which people who'd been in jail for various offences, they were the first to be notified to appear for an interview at the Feldkommandantur in Jersey, just to find out a bit more. And they were doing sort of medicals, but I don't think they were particularly thorough.
No, I mean, Guillemette asks about anyone that was attending a medical, people that were going to be given medical checks. So he wanted local doctors to be present. The Germans sort of basically said that this would not be necessary. These people, for their so-called examination, would have been by presumably German military doctors.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Lesotho talks about the fact that out of the first bunch of officers that were taken, that were made to go to the Feldkommandantur in Jersey, only 5 were selected as fit. And there was a bit of a kerfuffle about this because the Germans got a bit hacked off with some of their own doctors who were basically saying these people aren't fit to go. So what do you think they did?
Change the doctors?
Correct. We don't like the opinion this one's given us, so...
Well, we're seeing that at the moment across the pond, aren't we?
Yeah, we'll switch the doctor because we don't like the answer that one came up with. It's a difficult one, and they were telling these officers as well that you can take your family if you want, or you can leave them here. I mean, that must have been a really difficult decision. What do? You don't know how things are going because the deportations in September 1942 are not that far previous. There are a few messages coming through because they were able to write from from Laufen, etc. And those messages were longer than the Red Cross messages, so it could contain a lot more information. And those that were interned as well could write to the UK in a longer format than the Red Cross messages that were stuck with here. But at this point, you probably didn't know what you were facing in terms of being taken to Germany, as to whether you might be better off, not better off, or whatever.
Well, I think people would probably take the view that, home is home, and that's where you want to be. I can't see many people wanting to go to the heart of enemy territory. It seems counterintuitive.
Yeah, I know, but it's a case of do you make your family come with you or not? Are they going to...
Depends on your family.
Depending on how well you're getting on. It's probably a really, really difficult decision for these people. Initially, didn't get the results that they liked. And Lesotho records, as there's a number of people that record that, in their opinion, the local German officials are just against this, full stop. Now, this is probably partly because they've got an eye to what's likely to be happening, and maybe they're not going to win.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And maybe losing and having deported these people to Germany might not look so good if they're
I'm sure that must have crossed
facing a reckoning.
Well, yes. I mean, if you look at if we consider what was happening in the outside world at this point, I think Stalingrad had fallen, and also the Germans had suffered huge reverses in North Africa. So I think many Germans were starting to think, if the Allies win, attention is focused on how I performed in the war. I think many Germans, especially over here, where they're not pressured by instantly going into combat or anything, is starting to reflect a little bit, and with an eye to history, being on the right side of history.
Who knows? Also, the other thing is some of the people. You've got the likes of von Schmettau. I mean, he's essentially an aristocrat. He's the nephew of von Rundstedt.
Yes, he's well connected.
He's well connected. He's an honourable, or certainly in terms of the German army, an honourable man. And let's face facts, he was invited, he came back to the Channel Islands in the 60s, and he wrote to the bailiff after the war to inquire about the well-being of Channel Islanders. He wasn't disliked because he did his best to mitigate, and certainly it would seem what he could do to mitigate against things. Hofmeier's not turned up by this point. I mean, I think if Hofmeier had been in the Channel Islands by this point, then we would have seen, well, stuff it, we'll send as many as possible.
Yeah, I mean, many of the senior officers over here were sort of far more Prussian than they were Nazi. That's for sure.
Well, yeah, until you get to the likes of Hofmeier and people like that. But, the SOTUS think that they're worried that the whole scheme is going to be a flop. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. People were getting their marching orders, and there just seemed to be no logic to some of them. And there were differences between the islands.
Yes, one of the things I wanted to sort of focus in and ask you about is that one of the things that Louis Guillemette is told is that our bailiff would be examined by the medical board. And this is quite incredible. This, as you say, we had a relatively elderly gentleman who was the head of our government. If we can even if you said like titular head of the government, the local controlling committee, the truncated government here, were absolutely appalled to hear that this gentleman would be compelled to have a medical and go up before a medical board. And he finds, by talking to Baron von Alphas, and I'll ask you to talk a bit about the Baron in the context of what we're talking about here, but when Louis Guillemette asks, is the bailiff in Jersey receiving a letter to compel him to appear before a medical board? Apparently Louis Guillemette has said that in Jersey things are done in a different way.
So part of what was done differently between the islands is that the persons responsible for collating the lists and sending things out, the Feldkommandantur in Guernsey, and this, I can't see that this was in any way endorsed by those higher up the command chain within the Feldkommandantur, but as far as I can gather from the various documents that I've read, etc., the clerks, NCOs, whatever, who were compiling the lists and getting these letters sent out, were taking two different views between the islands in terms of what counted as military service. It wasn't supposed to count if you'd been in the Guernsey militia or the Jersey militia. And that was the view that was taken in Jersey. So the Feldkommandantur in Jersey did not count that as being military service. You were off the hook.
Okay, so they're drawing in Jersey. They're drawing They were drawing a line between service in support of the islands as opposed to being in the UK Army, Air Force, or Navy.
And whoever was doing it here took a far more hard line and basically
merged the two.
Basically, anything other than the Boy Scouts, and you're on the list, and that was where a whole bunch of these people were ending up on the list, and it was causing real problems. I mean, Louis Guillemette goes off to see the bailiff and get his signature on a letter and a notice for the papers talking about how to communicate with our internees. So basically how you could send them letters and stuff. So going back to me saying earlier that, you just really couldn't, at this point, you wouldn't have known much going on. And by the time he's got back from seeing the bailiff, he gets back to Maison-Allaire at the top of Smith Street, which is next door to Herzl House, for anybody that knows Guernsey, opposite the Prince of Wales, if you navigate by pubs, which is or near the large war memorial, which you want to go by. So Maison-Allaire, in fact, a building that I used to have to visit quite a lot in the 90s, because the company I worked for actually used that for part of their offices. I wasn't based there, but I used to go into that building quite a bit. He gets back to Maison-Allaire from seeing the bailiff, and when he arrives there, he gets a letter which says that the bailiff's just received this letter, and that he's going to have to go in front of a medical board because General Muller, the officer commanding Channel Lines at that point, has decided that he needs to present himself at the Regal Cinema. So, well, that's where the Odeon car park is now, but what became the Odeon Cinema. He had to present himself at 5:30 on Saturday next. So he had a little bit of notice. He had to present himself at the cinema because that's one of the sites where they were doing these medicals and deciding whether that they would pursue this. And Gilmet quite rightly says he was dumbfounded, so much so that he actually laughed because
with incredulity.
It was just incredulous that man who I think by this point was in his late 70s. The fact that he was to be taken there is unbelievable.
But von Alphes makes the point to Louis Guillemette that by being brought up in front of the medical board didn't equate to being deported. He actually says that in von Alphes's own opinion, the bailiff would not be leaving the island. So a medical didn't equate to definite deportation.
No.
It's difficult to see why they bothered to do it if they weren't going to deport them. But I think really this is a sort of process that's in transit. And von Alphes can see that at some point, common sense is going to prevail. So, and we know now, of course, that the bailiff and members of the controlling committee weren't actually. Well, that's not true because we know Sherwell is eventually deported.
So the bailiff, just to clear things up, because we're bandying names around it here, was Sir Victor Carey was the bailiff who wasn't he wasn't a particularly young man, but he served throughout the occupation, and he wasn't, as I say, a particularly young man. Then you've got Durat-Lille, who's in charge nominally of the controlling committee, but also is not a young man, and he's facing potentially being sent. It's just, and Guillemette goes and takes this letter which says that the bailiff's going to be carted off. He takes that and shows it to Lille, and Lille also laughs because he just can't believe it. He just thinks it's just absolutely ridiculous. He read it out to those present in the room. Ambrose Sherwell was on the list. Dr. Gibson was also on the list. There were a whole load of people on the list.
But some of them had actually served in His Majesty's services, they would have sort of been on another list anyway.
Yeah, they end up on the list for various different reasons. But yeah, so von Alphes says, sorry, I can never work out how to pronounce his name, to be fair. We probably really should ask Steve the next time I see him. He was a baron, and he came as a staff officer to the German military government in late 42, I think it was. His diary doesn't come online, or one of his diaries rather, doesn't come online until 1943. He's a very interesting character. His diaries have been edited by John Nettles of Bergerac fame, and it's called Gentle Violence Diaries 1943 to 45. It's a really good insight from a German perspective as to what's going on, and he doesn't pull his punches either.
No, it's interesting.
He's quite critical of some of his colleagues.
But it has been published before, but in heavily redacted, because you gave me a copy. But then it was published about a year ago now by Blue Ormer, and it's a very handsome book, and the Baron a very charismatic person. And it's published by Blue Ormer. If you wish to know more about the book, you can get hold of either Nick or myself at occupied@gnetradio.com.
I'll stick a link in.
So he does, as I think Nick has pointed out, the Baron's diary doesn't start to feature in our podcasts until the back end of 1943. But if you wish to do a little bit of set work before we get to that date, then it's well worth acquiring a copy of the book, and you'll know exactly. You'll be well prepared for when the Baron starts to have his say.
Yeah. I mean, the Guillemette, after he's been to see Lille, he comes back, he literally walks next door back to his office in Maison-Lair, because the two buildings are right next door to each other. And in the time that he's been gone to see Lille, the phone's been ringing off the hook effectively, and he's found out that he's got messages that 5 doctors have received these, including Dr. Simmons. Now, we've talked about Simmons before.
Chief medical officer.
The chief medical officer, the Germans tried to replace him. They absolutely flipping hated him because he kept writing reports about how what they were doing in terms of rationing, etc., was causing all sorts of problems for the population, and they really didn't like him because basically those were going to be fairly damning reports. And Mrs. Lille had telephoned to say that one had arrived for Durat Lille, Mr. Frossard, Raymond Fuller, who'd been doing all the buying, lots and lots of people.
It was like they were trying to remove several thorns from their sides.
Yeah, basically a whole load of people in authority, as well as anybody else that had just basically was a bit of a nuisance. So Lille, Sherwell, Dr. Simmons and Guillemette went to Grange Lodge, and they said they had quite a friendly chat with von Alsace on the subject. And he says it may sound strange, but the conversation was friendly when it was to affect adversely so many of our people. The Baron gave assurances that he would do his utmost to try and stop these things from happening quite so much. I mean, you were getting elderly members of the clergy were getting these. They were basically trying to boot out most of the clergy. And in the end, what happened was there was a bit of negotiation, and it was agreed basically that representatives of each branch of religion could stay. And that was basically the deal was done. I mean, they were going to send one of them. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he was basically almost completely blind, mostly deaf, a very unwell man, and they were going to go, yeah, absolutely, send him.
Yeah,
unbelievable. But the one thing that also is quite telling in terms of when they talk about going to these medicals and such like is the state they talk about the Regal Cinema. And I hadn't really thought about this before, but I guess you're 2.5 years into the occupation, and the Regal Cinema is probably a reflection of the state of things in Guernsey, because Guillemette talks about it was just all threadbare, falling apart, etc. And it's a bit like if you haven't been able to repair anything for 2.5 years, it's been suffering from quite a lot of use, which the Regal Cinema was. It was one of the few places of entertainment that was used by the Germans and by Islanders, and the place is falling apart and looking a bit threadbare, which is also something that had been mentioned about in the previous episode about how the state of Islanders, that they were looking a bit threadbare. But Guillemette talks about the holes are not infrequent in the luxurious carpets and the gangway. The velvet armrests on the seats show signs of heavy wear, and most of the padding's gone in a lot of cases. And he said it's really difficult to imagine how such a dingy atmosphere can have taken the place of such a place of spruce comfort, which it was a relatively new building as well, immediately pre-war. I think it was built in the 30s.
Yeah, it was built up, those of us remember it, in an Art Deco style.
So it was a fantastic building, it really was.
So by the end of the month in question then, January 1943, had the deportations that it did eventually result from all of this, had they taken place?
No, they didn't take place until February.
That's right. So I think in February 43 we'll return to this in terms of the actual process of the deportations.
And the numbers of people that went as well. That's another interesting aspect of it.
Yeah. Oh, now I want to move away then from deportations, because we will in the next episode return to the subject. And I want to talk about Monsieur Binet. You've got quite a bit on this gentleman.
Yeah, this chap, he was the alleged leader of a cat burglary gang. who went about with wholesale thefts of food, and Wood notes that, sometimes foreigners are made a scapegoat of and to avoid the blame going elsewhere, i.e. the Germans, because they were up to a lot of thieving as well, because they were short of stuff, as well as other locals, to be fair.
And this is in Guernsey.
Yeah, this is in Guernsey. So this chap Binet, he wasn't doing this on a small scale. He was raiding warehouses.
So it was racketeering.
Yeah, absolutely. He was a Frenchman, Jean Binet. He was only aged 18.
Robin Hood.
They published a picture of him in the Guernsey press. He was wanted on charges of warehouse breaking.
So he was at large. So he was a sort of people. He was moving around the island, presumably in disguise, or it's quite a story.
Well, yeah, it was claimed that he's been responsible for the thefts from Luff and Co. stores at Mansell and Union Streets. I think we talked about those in an earlier episode. And Murdoch's premises, and he was taking large quantities of tobacco, raided the tobacco warehouse in Cornet Street, and in it, although he's obviously giving himself away as it was the same bloke, because in every case, entry's been made through the roof. That must have been pretty difficult, because get away with not being spotted, given the number of Germans kicking about.
Well, this is all starting a little suspicious. As he must have had some help here.
Oh, he was in charge of a gang, apparently. And there's ample evidence, apparently, according to the Guernsey police in this article, that he was still at large in the St. Peter Port district, and that he had come within a hair's breadth on at least 2 occasions of being caught by the police, but had succeeded in evading their net. They'd thrown a net around his likely haunts, but somebody else, it says only with the help of a local man, did he avoid capture a few days ago. But they had to step up guards on warehouses and stuff like that to enable them to prevent him from stealing.
But if he was stealing items on an almost industrial scale, he must have been hiding this in somewhere and distributing it and moving it around the island. I mean, how could he have done that? It's not as if he could just get a van, because no one had a van. I mean, how did he transport stuff?
They used a cart. He had some sort of hand cart, which he didn't get very far when he stole the stuff from Luff's, because he only ended up about 500 yards away. So they must have had other guys that helped them to carry it around. But Ruth Ozan talks about it. The burglaries have been increasing, but the chief gang have now been rounded up. So she hopes for quieter times. Nobody can keep rabbits even when they're in sheds with padlocks. As she says, these foreigners get in and steal them. Mostly, she notes, just about the time those rabbits are fit to kill. So she reckons that they're watching, and that's how they know. But they caught some of these guys in Cornet Street. So Guernsey police laid a trap. They put a cache of goods in some empty houses in Cornet Street, and they caught 3 out of 4 of the ringleaders. But the 4th was Jean Binet. This guy's got no papers, so he's got no way of obtaining food. So that's probably partly part of the fact he's got money on the bludgeon.
Yeah.
But he was spotted by Coke. But, I mean, it was a large, I reckon there were about 30 of them that were in and one of them actually. He was a chap who hit Mr. and Mrs. Bessard in shopkeepers in Mill Street, and that guy was actually captured in Paris. So he'd actually got off the island. And, he'd badly injured those people. But
so he's captured in Paris. He managed to inveigle himself onto a ship. Yeah.
Presumably because he'd
bribed his way onto a ship.
Because he committed this assault on these shopkeepers.
So what happened to Binet then?
I don't actually have any record of what happened to him.
So he was he? Well, the thing is, was he caught?
He was caught,
but he wasn't caught in January. So we could do. He was caught.
He was caught in January.
Oh,
yeah.
He was, yeah.
There, the trail goes cold because there's no report of it in the Guernsey press. I've gone through all the January and February ones.
So he sort of disappears.
Yeah, I'm not. But he would have gone into the Guernsey prison system, I believe. So
yeah.
I will do some more digging and find out.
But, can't leave it just like that.
Of course, there's also the news that the Sark murderer has been found, the man who killed the German doctor, not the Batman who had been suspected and had apparently committed suicide by throwing himself down a well, but it was actually somebody else. But we talked about that, I think, with Tim Osborne when he came on.
We did.
So if you want to find out more about that, but this chap was a brief overview. This chap was brought back from Germany and all the way to Guernsey just so they could shoot him.
Yeah. And it is worth listening to the tale again, because there was quite an exceptional German civil policeman, I think, got involved in.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and it's
a real sleuth.
It's a real interesting story. It's a real murder mystery. It's well worth. In fact, actually, if you're listening to this, yeah, you will have time to go on it. Tim's actually running his tour Saturday the 13th, which is next Saturday. So if you're listening to this when it goes out on Monday the 9th, you've still got time to book with Tim Osborne. If you go onto Facebook, Tim's Guided Walks, or go and look at the Autumn Walking Festival website. If you just Google Guernsey Autumn Walking Festival, Tim's got an all-day tour to Sark. I highly recommend it. I've been on it twice. Really, really good. He covers Operation Basalt, Operation Hardtack, but also a lot of other stories, including this murder of the doctor and all the things that went on around that.
Yeah,
so well worth going. I
highly recommend it. Are you going again?
Oh, I'm in.
Of course you are. We'll talk about that later. And I'll be on duty at Fort Grey, so regrettably I won't be able to make it.
I think this might be one of the last chances. I saw that Tim mentioned that this might be one of the last times that he's running this. So if you don't want to miss out, it's well worth it. It's a really good day out.
Okay, moving on. Now, we had some RAF down planes. We are aware of one in some detail. Do you want to start off with that then? This is Pilot Officer Edwards, I think Australian?
Edwards, hang on, let me get my notes. I was just looking at the other one, actually. Where's it gone?
Well, yeah, we've got Nick's got quite a bit on Pilot Officer Edwards, and there was another casualty, Flight Sergeant Balha from the Czech squadron.
Yeah, got nothing really about him, unfortunately.
No, his plane came down northeast of Alderney on the 15th of January 1943. So we'll try and find out a little bit more if we can. But Nick has got quite a bit, I think, on Pilot Officer Edwards from the Royal Australian Air Force 541 Squadron, also flying a Spitfire Mark IV. And he came down southeast to Guernsey. Can you take it from there, Nick?
Yeah, sure. So he was Alan Grayson Edwards. He was a flying officer. He took off from RAF Mount Farm. Like many of these things, it's long disappeared RAF base. But I've got the Squadron Ops book. This is one of the operations Edwards called Tangmere. He was basically doing some reconnaissance, etc. The previous day had been completely wasted because it was far too cloudy. Weather conditions weren't great, actually, and Edwards had engine trouble. He called RAF Tangmere over the VHS and asked them from homing directions at 15:20 hours, and he was on a vector of 310, was over Caen, so quite a long way away from Guernsey at that point. That's probably got to be 100 miles as crow flies, I would have thought. And apparently heading towards Start Point, which is, the closest point to the Channel Islands of the south coast of England. He was at 17,000 feet, and they maintained contact with him for quite a while, and they gave him a vector. But then a message was received which says, I think I'll have to bail out. And then he says, getting out, can you hear me? And then I've got another kick out of her, so he carries on for a bit, but unfortunately, nothing further was heard from the aircraft. It was plotted at 13,000 feet, 11 miles southwest of Guernsey before it went down. They sent out air sea rescue just to see if they could find him. Distress signal was transmitted to the German air sea rescue to see if they could get him, but nothing was found of him, unfortunately. He was flying blind in cloud and was completely unaware of his position.
Okay, so he bailed out. And this is interesting. So the British were aware that he was bailing out, and did they somehow communicate with the Germans?
Yeah.
Yes. So how did I was sort of vaguely aware of this, but how did that work, Nick?
I'm not entirely sure. I really must look into this. I'm not entirely sure as to quite how that worked in terms of communicating with them to ask them to go pick somebody up. I'll look into that.
Because there must have been, I know that there were various protocols, certainly when I was looking after the Kriegsmarine bunker over here, that certainly every quarter of an hour, once an hour, you stopped what you were doing to listen for any Morse code distress signals, which was you just stopped and listened to see if anybody was sending anything. Then then you resumed what you were doing, and then I think half an hour after that, you listened for any free-to-air distress signals, and I think that's happened every hour around the clock, and presumably was an international protocol, and there must have been a way. Whether they did it through a neutral country, I don't know. So we'll have to look into that.
Yeah, no, I'll look into it, and I'm sure I can find out. If not, I know a man who does know the answer to that.
Okay, well, look, we've got quite a few notices now. We go into the final part of this episode 2 of January 1943. We move away from the core of the episode, and now, Nick, you wanted to put out a query for some information?
Yeah, no, this would be of great help to me for something I'm looking at the moment. I'm helping somebody with some stuff around the schools in exile. So we're obviously aware of all the published accounts that are out there. But what we're particularly interested in is if anybody's got any family memories of their, relatives that were exiled to the UK as part of a school.
Yeah. So what was the UK?
Yeah, I mean, what was actually going on for them in school? I'm particularly interested in Ladies' College, Elizabeth College, but all of the schools. But in terms of Ladies' College and Elizabeth College, particularly interested in what was going on actually in the buildings here as well, because there's a couple of aspects to this.
Yes, very good.
We want to kind of tie things into what was going on, because obviously Elizabeth College was used by the controlling committee until I think it was June 41 when they got booted out by the Germans who wanted to use it. The gymnasium was used for storage of food, but the controlling committee used Elizabeth College until they had to move down to Herzl House when the Germans booted them out. I've got bits and pieces around the building, etc., and I'm actually going to the archives on Tuesday to go and look at a load of paperwork. But what would be really great if anybody's got any family memories of being at school in the UK, but actually the school days aspect of it rather than just the evacuee bit.
Well, my father went to St Martin's School here on the island, and there were a couple of bunkers in the playground, which can be seen when I take my family up Warsaw.
Yeah, there's plenty of bunkers at Elizabeth College as well.
Oh yes, yeah.
There's plenty that they put in there, no doubt for various reasons, which we'll come to. But so if anybody wants to get hold of me for that specific thing, you can get me at nick@lehure.com. So there's a dash between the le and the hure.com. Or you can get me at contact@island-fortress.com, just for those specific bits, so that I can make sure that I pick those up and take a look at those. That would be immensely appreciated.
Okay, and then you're going to be talking about your book next week, all of the subject that's covered in your book.
Correct.
At We Have Ways. Can you just give people an idea of what We Have Ways is?
Yeah, so it's held at Black Pit Brewery, which it sounds like just like a building or something like that. It's not. It's actually a vast site. It's near Silverstone, and the brewery's in the middle of it, but it's basically a whole bunch of land where they do all sorts of things. So there's various stages. Absolutely cast of some stunning authors and historians, and then there's people like me going along to talk about it.
Don't yourself.
So I'm going to be talking about escapes. The whole festival's organised by Goalhanger, which is they do a whole load of history podcasts, and We Have Ways is Al Murray and James Holland. So Al Murray, aka the pub landlord, and James Holland, the historian. They organise it. There's going to be somewhere between 3,500 and 5,000 people there for the weekend. I'm speaking on the Friday, so I get to get it out of the way quickly. I'm on at 12 o'clock. But if you are in the UK, as I say, it's right next to Silverstone.
And you're talking. Can you just be a little bit more precise about what your talk is about?
I'm talking about those that escaped from or tried to escape from the Channel Islands, which there were a surprising amount. It passes a lot of people by. It's not often referred to. There have been a few short articles and a very, very short book which focused on Jersey and was written quite a long time ago. So I'm doing that. I'm going to be there for the whole weekend. And if anybody's listening who is also going to We Have Ways, do come and say hello to me.
Yeah, so that's Nick speaking live at We Have Ways at 12 noon on Friday the 12th, and you'll be taking plenty of Islands at War cards with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
To give out. And
there might be Gosh as well.
So do please go along and chat with Nick. He'd love to talk to you. And then, Nick, we've got a gig together on the 1st of November.
We have, at the Imperial War Museum. So we mentioned this very briefly at the end of the last episode. We're going along and taking part in the Imperial War Museum's Podcast Live Festival, and there's a whole bunch of other history podcasts that are going to be there during the day as well. We're on 10 to 11 in the morning.
That's Saturday the 1st of November.
Yeah, it helps if I say which day, doesn't it? Yeah. So we're doing that. We've got a really interesting guest that we're going to talk to, a chap called James Bulgin, who is one of the directors at the Imperial War Museum. He's written about the Holocaust, and he's also appeared in a BBC documentary, as well as curating some of their exhibitions at the IWM. There is a cost attached to it, not from us. It's the IWM charge. Very reasonable, I think, £40 for the whole day.
For the whole day.
And you can go and take part in guided tours around there. But there's some absolutely brilliant podcasts. History Rage are going to be there, Paul Baville. There's so many I can't. For You, The War Is Over, which is a great one about prisoner of war escape. So go and check them out if you haven't listened to them. That's another cracking podcast. There's too many to mention. It's really good. So we'll be recording in front of a live audience, which will be a first for us. We haven't done that. We've been and spoken to many a live audience, but we haven't actually recorded. So we're going to be recording it. We might potentially try and broadcast it live. But the jury's out on that at the moment in terms of the technology.
Yeah, but if anybody is attending, then and they have the opportunity to come and find us, I don't know, we're going to be wearing armour shells so people will know who we are. I don't know, but it'd be nice to talk to people if
I'm sure
we'll be there for most of the day, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really looking forward to that. Yeah, I'm really pleased that we've been asked to come and tell our bit of history.
And are we going to be in the local paper shortly?
Potentially. They got in touch with me the other day, so whether they use it or not, I don't know. They did give me a call the other day to have a chat about the fact that I'm doing We Have Ways and that we're doing the IWM thing. So quite possibly we'll turn up in the Guernsey Press at some point.
Okay, well then we're very nearly at the end. We'll be looking at February 1943, and that will go out in September 2025. So we're on course, I think, Nick, to be doing Christmas 43 by Christmas 25. That's our aim.
That's the plan. Oh, a bit of shameless self-publicity as well. Joe May and myself have got a walking tour on the 20th of September. That's a Saturday at 2:00. We're going to be doing that down at Bordeaux. We're meeting again. If you go to the Autumn Walking Festival website, you can find the details on there. We're talking about escapes. Funnily enough, I seem to talk about those quite a bit. Also, fortifications and
concrete
incarceration. Not so much the concrete, actually. A lot of the fortifications I talk about are either pre-existing ones or sort of temporary ones. But
and when is that, Nick?
That's the 20th of Saturday, the 20th of
September.
Yep, 2 weeks' time. So Joe and I are doing that.
Okay,
it's about a 4-mile walk.
It's gentle pace.
Yeah, gentle pace. Yeah, absolutely. We'll go at the pace of the slowest person. So really looking forward. We did it last year, but it was absolutely piddling down and blowing a hand gap. So hopefully, fingers crossed, wood touched.
Be recommended.
We'll be all right for that. But we'll be talking about people getting locked up for misbehaving, people escaping. Got a few good escape stories. You can actually see where they escaped from whilst we're doing the tour. Pop by a few places of interest in terms of houses that some of these people lived in, and in fact, we'll be passing Louis Guilmete's house as well. So I'll be talking about him as well. Yeah.
Now, one of the things, because I take tours, as you know, is the terrain, because some people do worry about mobility.
Yeah. This one's all right. It's all on the flat. There's a tiny bit of coastal path,
Yeah.
but it's all on the flat. So yeah, it's roads on through some of the lanes and on the flat on the coastal path.
And as always,
a challenge.
As always, it's a beautiful part of the island. So enjoy the scenery as much as anything.
Absolutely.
But the mobility thing can put people off. So there's no cliff pass. It's all on the flat.
The only bit that's not on the flat is right at the very end when we go up to Vale Castle, which is very much not on the flat. But that would be the only bit that might be a bit more challenging for anybody because it's a bit of a slope going up there.
Okay, right. I think apart from wishing everyone, well, I nearly said Happy Christmas. Why am I thinking of that? Letting everybody know that they can, of course, get hold of us occupied at gnetradio.com. And I think as we move into autumn here, we'll be moving into spring shortly in 1943. But next episode, February 1943, and we'll major in on deportations.
Indeed, there's a lot to talk about in February 43. So again, it might end up being a two-parter. We'll see. We might have to put them out one a week just so that we can hit that Christmas deadline for Christmas 2025.
Well, we love your support. The statistics that we're getting back show that not only is the listenership going up, but it means that most of you, almost all of you, are sticking with us, and we really, really appreciate it. We never thought we would be communicating with so many people, and it's great to represent the Channel Islands in this way. And I think good luck next Friday, Nick. And I think we can say our goodbyes now.
Yeah, indeed. And we'll speak again soon, Keith.
We will. Alla Pashoin.
He looked to the heavens when he heard the engines hum. A sky full of planes and each one with a bomb. And they're gonna wanna drop them on someone. It's 5 to 7. All his friends and family had gone. Left on a ship 'cause they knew